Welcome to Sniblet number 17. Last week we introduced you to an invisible threat that keeps us in our marriages from experiencing oneness. We introduced you not to a what, but to a who, and that's the serpent, described in Genesis 3:1, that he was more crafty than any beast of the field. And of course, who we're talking about is the evil one, is Satan, who wants to steal, kill, and destroy our marriages. And that's kind of in the bullseye of his devotion. He wants to steal, kill, and destroy this.
To marriage. Yeah.
So today we want to introduce you to a second threat in our marriage. It's really us. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies.
Yeah.
It's an internal
So
threat,
true.
which is because of our sin capacity. It's our selfishness.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, in Isaiah 53:6, it says, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way." You know, when Adam and Eve were tempted and chose to sin, they began trusting self more than God. And this created the separation, the spiritual separation from God and the relational separation from each other that has carried on and that we experience as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, to give you cliff notes of this effect of selfishness, if you were to take Genesis chapter 3,
you might want to open that up and read that along with us.
This would be a good assignment for you to do together, but to read Genesis chapter 3, verses 7 through 16. Because as a result of our selfishness, it shows specifically how Adam and Eve, as a result of their selfishness, began to focus on things. For instance, in verse 7, they focused on shame. Shame is feeling bad for who you are. In verse 7, it talks about, well, before they were naked and unashamed. Now, because of sin, they're sewing fig leaves together to try to cover up. And that's part of, we try to cover up, we try to shield ourselves from God because we feel bad for who we are.
Right. And then the next verse, verse 8, you see guilt, where they hid themselves because they felt bad for what they had done. That's what guilt is when we actually feel bad for the things that we've done.
Yeah.
It just keeps going.
Literally in verse 9 and 10, we're afraid.
Yeah.
Because of our sin, it causes a fear factor in us. And we're fearful that I'm fearful you're going to find out about me and my sin. You're fearful that I'm going to find out, but ultimately we're fearful that God is going to find out. Well, God already knows.
Right.
So it's that, man, we live in this fear factor. Gosh, if you knew how selfish I am, you wouldn't like me.
And then it just keeps getting worse. Verses 11 through 14, you have this dialogical display of blame shifting, where he blames her and she blames Satan, and it just goes back and forth, and we do that today.
Right.
All of these things, fear, shame, guilt, blame shifting, you probably see evident in your own marriage at different times.
And because of that selfishness, Genesis 3, 7 through 16, there's a battle for control.
Big time.
You know, the issue's not the issue's control. Well, that is true in our marriages. It's like he specifically says, her desire shall be for him. And that word desire is not a good thing, because later on in Genesis 4, he uses that word as Satan has a desire for us, to hurt us.
Right.
So when you think of that phrase, Julie, her desire shall be for him, what comes to mind?
Well, it's not just what I think, but Scripture really shows us in there, if you do some study in there, that word desire is not a physical desire for him, but it is a sense that you want his job. And because by then, God has very clearly named the man as the helper, the leader and the one in charge of the relationship. And he has made the woman to be the helper. And so we stand there, and our desire for him means we want his job. And what the man is feeling in this broken state is that he just wants her to do what he wants her to do. Right,
which is part of the equation where it says that he shall try to rule over her.
Yeah.
The idea, his battle cry, just do what I say.
Yeah.
Which is so antithetical to what God set up the relationship to be interactive, for her to help. Well, if he's just saying, just do what I say, well, she's not doing what she was created to do, to help him.
Yeah. So the problem, ultimately, that sin created or unleashed in us is that instead of focusing on the needs of our spouse, we now focus on our own wants
Yeah.
and needs. And that's broken fellowship.
Yeah, I think we've shared a little bit about this, but go back, let's simplify it. You've got a triangle. You've got God at the top. You've got Adam and Eve at the base of that triangle. When they were created in the garden, everything was in perfect harmony. But the minute they sinned, the relationship between Adam and God was severed. The relationship between Eve and God was severed. But then also the consequence, the relationship between Adam and Eve was centered. So you've got this triangle that's broken in all three places.
Yeah.
Well, that broken triangle, we naturally inherit in our own relationships. So my relationship, because of my sin, is hindered between me and God.
Yeah.
Because of Julie's sin, her relationship is hindered between her and God. And as a result, our relationship with each other is hindered between one another.
Yeah.
Our selfishness causes us to look to other things for fulfillment.
Yeah.
We can literally look to other people to fulfill us sexually. We can crave someone else who doesn't belong to us.
Or just even emotionally.
Yeah.
When it's lacking. But we also, this internal threat of selfishness basically causes us to find fulfillment outside of our marriage if we're not careful. Think about our career or our ambitions, dreams, and desires. Those all can be wonderful things, but they can also be an area where we are finding fulfillment outside of our marriage. Even just favorite activities, things that we enjoy doing can become too extreme to where they're depleting the marriage. Fantasy, pornography, all of those things can do that.
Yeah. You know, think about what we've done last week as we looked at an invisible threat, which is Satan himself. This week we've looked at an internal threat, which is our own selfishness. Next week, what we're going to do is look at an external threat. But how do we apply this whole idea of our combating our internal selfishness? What do you suggest?
Well, I think part of it is making it part of your language. I know how hard it is when we're in a disagreement to actually realize I am so selfish. And so I think, you know, we've actually tried to put some of those words into practice as we communicate with each other. So that's one thing that you can do, but maybe really take some time to sit down and identify specifically how have these areas of distraction possibly impacted you? Your career, some of your activities, any of those things that we've mentioned, how have they impacted you negatively so that you can rein them in and bring them back into focus?
Yeah. Identify how many times our selfishness interferes with us.
Right. And know that it's not something you can fix. It's something that we have to really depend on God to continually redeem us in that area.
Yeah, it is the spiritual battle.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to being with you next week as we introduce you to an external threat.
Right.
So, see you next week.